Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Zatlin. How's it going, man?
I just want to thank you, Ben. Sometimes it's you have a busy schedule, I have a busy schedule, and we want to try to make this work, the podcast scheduling. And my plea to Ben was, hey, can we push back the podcast scheduling an hour because I want to see if the Steelers, are having a close game if they win. And then the Steelers went up by 10, and I said, all right, if they score on this next drive, we can do it, and they did. The problem is that as soon as I said that, then the Cincinnati came back with their own touchdown, like not even a minute later, which I was like, great. But now it looks like the Steelers are going to put it away. They've less than 4 minutes left. They're on their four. So
Yeah, I was about to
thank
say,
you.
do I need to check the score again? Because I felt like we were in a good place.
Well, look, I mean, the fact that they put up 41 points as
Insane.
of right now
Yeah.
for the Steelers, we don't ever score. We just let the defense do their job, and we're like, Chris Boswell, get out there, you can do it, and that's our offense. So,
Yep. Yeah. I'm missing the start of the Eagles game, and that's okay. I'll be there for money time. So I'm happy to do it. Make this work because this week we've got end of season awards. So obviously last week we recapped the national meet, and today we're going through and kind of recapping the season and going into the different awards and talking about the nominees and maybe who we like to win those awards. But you won't know who actually wins the awards unless you go to the site and check out the article, which I think will probably be out by the time that this podcast is out. But before we get into all of that, we did get one new rating on Apple. I think we're up to 102 there. Nothing new on Spotify. Still at 177 there. But yeah, as far as house cleaning items, I think that's it.
just real quick note: if you have any questions that you want us to answer for a mailbag, thank you
Sure.
to everyone who has submitted those. I'm sorry if I haven't gotten back to you yet saying thank you, but I acknowledge thank you. And but again, DM, email, carrier pigeon, whatever it is, feel free to send it our way.
Absolutely. Look forward to doing that. It's been
Yeah,
a while since we've done one of those. And I think we also have to make sure we include the one question about professional cross country that we got in
yeah,
that one review.
yep.
So we got to make sure we cover that in an upcoming episode. But let's get into the end of season Division 1 cross country 2024 awards, and the first one that we will begin with is best freshman award on the men's side, which is a absolutely loaded category. So much so that we have 10 nominees, and I'll run through those real quick. JoJo Jordan of Wake Forest, Bailey Habler of Villanova, Robin Clemoy Berra of Iowa State. From California Baptist, we have Zuhair Rodan, Dismas Lakira of Alabama, Evans Karui, Washington State, Justin Kipkoich of Eastern Kentucky, Solomon Kipchoge, Texas Tech, Collins Kiprotich, New Mexico, and finally, Alan Kiplagat of Middle Tennessee State. We were trying to narrow this list down, but it was impossible because each of these guys has just a very compelling case to be nominees for this.
Just so everyone knows, our criteria for all these awards is that we have to have minimum 4 nominees. Typically, try to cap it at 9 nominees. 9 nominees is the most we want to try to get to, but on very rare occasions, we'll occasionally have 10. We had one category last year that had 10. This season, we're going to have one category that has 10. Everyone else is maxed out at 9 at least, or at the max, I should say. So small note there. Also, freshmen who are like redshirt freshmen or any kind of eligibility extension like that, they do not count towards this award. Where who were like the few names that it kind of came down to in your mind?
Yeah, I think for me it was Kwemoy Berra of Iowa State was certainly up there. I think Solomon Kipchoge was the other one for me that really stood out. You could make some cases for some other guys. I think Zuhair Radan of CBU was very very good. You can say, hey, Justin Kipkoich had some really like one or two spectacular races. But I think it was those two guys that it came down to for me.
I struggle with Kipchoge. mainly
Yeah.
because there's only one actual race. Like, yes, he won Arturo Barrios, and yes, that was a top heavy field, and yes, it
Right.
was good, but it wasn't the same as like a Joe Piani or pre-nationals
Mhm.
or Nutty Comb, right? And the only real like true challenge that he had was at Big 12s. And then he doesn't even run at the national meet.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I just don't think I can give him that just because we didn't see enough. Is he probably just as talented or the most talented guy among these freshmen? Yeah. But just because we think that doesn't necessarily mean that we can just say, well, you're the best. Like we had an entire season and we didn't see him. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. I think again, and this is why awards are so fun to argue about, because you can say the best freshman award. Who is the best freshman in terms of like totality of their resume? Are we saying the best in terms of like the most talented or fastest runner? You can interpret it in that a lot of ways. And for me, why I kind of landed on Kipchoge is, if you, in my mind, if you are in our top tier of like individual contenders going into the national meet, I think that is a compelling reason to put you as the best freshman of the year award, because very few freshmen ever have done that where they're in that tier. Granted, he didn't run on the national meet, and I think it's a very valid criticism to say, hey, you didn't even start at the most important race of the year. That certainly dings him a little bit, but I think just the overwhelming talent that we saw was enough to push him across the line
Yeah. It just kind of goes back to what we perceived at that time versus what
for me.
actually the season said. For
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
it came down to really like four guys. Robin Kiwabera of Iowa State, Zuhir Rodain of California Baptist, Dismas Olkir of Alabama, and Evans Karui of Washington State. Justin Kipkowick, again, was a DNF. And I
yeah,
know everyone's going to say, well, Alan Kiplagat of Middle Tennessee State was the top freshman in 19th place. But the entirety of his season was just not anywhere remotely close to top 20 in the NCAA.
no,
So it came down to me for those four guys. I think there's legitimate arguments for all of them. And
mhm,
the fun part about this is that I think I can kind of give away who I'm taking, because as of right now, with four of our five votes in, it seems pretty diverse. I can tell you that.
yes,
So I'll say I'll put mine out on the line, and you can as well because it's so diverse. I picked Zuhair Rodin of California Baptist. He was consistently great throughout the entire season. He wasn't maybe not the top freshman at the national meet, but he was, I think, the best freshman among the the freshmen who were running consistently great throughout the season.
yeah. I think he
He
was
kind,
second as it was. So I think that's. I mean,
yeah,
that was arguably his best race of the year. He showed up when it mattered the most. So
yeah, and again, it's also like he also raced at Joe Piani. He
mhm.
raced at, which I think they raced at pre
Pre
nationals.
nationals, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So for me, I took him, but as you'll see in the votes, a lot of different opinions on this award.
Yeah, I don't think out of Redan and Camoibera, I don't think there's anything that I would say, oh, that's the wrong answer. In my mind, I agree. I think Camoibera, I mean, just to make the case for him, 37th at the national meet, but was clearly like that was one of his worst races of the
Hmm.
year, and still was an All American. And I think if you put him, if he finishes maybe 20 spots higher, 15 spots higher, I think he probably ends up winning this award in my mind. Um, but yeah, I don't think there's certainly a wrong answer on this. Anybody further down this list that you want to talk about real quick?
I just love Bailey Habler for Villanova. Like we snuck him in, but I just like him a lot. He was a great value pick
Hmm.
in terms of like what he brought to Villanova's team. I think you can like imagine relative to each team's goals or like where they were at nationally. I think you could argue that Bailey Habler was among the more valuable guys of this group. Again, Kiwan Barra, Rodain, maybe Lakira as well. Those guys were truly crucial to the success of their teams. Jojo Jordan as well.
Yep.
But Habler felt like the most impactful of that group to his respective team.
I would maybe push back and you could maybe say JoJo Jordan. I mean the stability that he gave that lineup and the
Yeah,
firepower. I hear you from Habler's perspective. Like they desperately needed someone to bridge the divide from their top two to the rest of the lineup, and he was able to do that fairly well this year.
just a quick note before we move on. but Wake Forest ran very well without him in the regular season. They got
Yeah,
third at
I mean, they
Nutty.
did have more depth, but that was also like when Rocky Hansen was running well. When Rocky Hansen wasn't running well, he was a much more critical part of that team.
Right, but you can see now how we play these like
Yeah,
mental
yeah,
gymnastics, and
yeah,
that's why I'm going with Habler. So, all right.
yeah.
Anything further on the men?
Nope. Let's go on to the women's side. The best freshman of the year award for the women. The nominees are Pamela Kosgei of New Mexico, Caroline Jeptuani of Tulane, Rachel Forsyth, Michigan State, Joy Nokut of West Virginia, Brenda Jepchirchir of Auburn, Judy Chepkowicz of Arizona State, Mercy Carrari of New Mexico, Leah Gerudo of Oklahoma, and Sylvia Jalego of Clemson. I feel like we said the same exact thing last year, but just an absolutely stacked category. Once again, I think the winner is very obvious, but you look through the rest of this list, and there are a lot of deserving candidates in most any other year.
Who's your so obviously we don't have to beat around the bush on this
Yeah.
one. Pamela Kosgei will win. She's the favorite. It would be weird if she didn't. I'm going to force everyone to vote for her if they didn't already. Who was the second pick you had here? And I also think this
Yeah.
might even be pretty straightforward if I'm looking at this right, but who was your pick?
For me, it was Caroline Jeptanui of Tulane.
Yeah, that's I think that's also mine. So let's keep knocking this down. Who was your third? Who's your third in this category?
All right, let
Because
me.
this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, I think it's probably Joy Nokut of
Yep.
West Virginia. Just, I mean, her emergence as a impactful low stick for West Virginia is what ultimately pushed them to a second place finish. 17th at nationals was just good pretty much every time she touched the grass. Rachel Forsyth finished ahead of her at nationals, but you can't argue that Nokut had a worse season than her. Like she was just clearly better than Forsyth for the rest of the year. So
Yeah, I completely agree, and I don't want to be redundant here. And I also don't want to just dismiss this category, but it just seems like, despite as loaded as it is, it also just seems very predictable.
tiered out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very tiered out. That's a great way of putting it. So I don't really know if I have anything because I think everything that you said is exactly what I would have said. I think all of your picks are exactly my picks. And that's kind of all I got. How about this? For your fourth, would it have been Rachel Forsyth or someone else?
Someone else.
Yeah,
Brenda
I think so too.
Chachircher.
Probably Chip Churcher.
Yeah.
Or yeah, she was 24. Yeah, probably her. I mean, Forsyth, it's not that she wasn't incredible. It's just the regular season just wasn't as good compared to some of these other women. That's it.
No, she was not going to be on this list until her national performance. I think is probably
Uh,
you.
well, I think it depends on like
Yeah, how much we narrowed the list. I
if
think it
she's
would have.
40th,
Yeah.
does she get on this list?
Yeah. If she's an All-American, I think she's
Okay.
on this list. But I don't think. I mean, I don't. I certainly didn't predict her. I don't think to be an All-American.
Some people did. I mean,
Yeah.
she
Okay.
was what, third at Big Tens, and she's second at Great Lakes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So she ultimately finished the season quite on a high. But yeah, I really don't have anything else. I mean, everybody on this list contributed and had big highs throughout the season. It just was extremely competitive just to be in the top three of this list.
I agree. I agree. All right, let's head move on, and we can go to most improved on the men's side. It is a stacked field yet again. We have Marco Langone of Villanova, William Zagarski of Butler, Charlie Sprott of Wake Forest, Lucas Bonds, BYU, Colton Sands, North Carolina, Aiden Smith of Oregon, George Cootie of Virginia Tech, Gary Martin of Virginia, and Abraham Chalengam of Oral Roberts. Who'd you got?
So I have a preliminary pick, but I don't know if I'm married to it right now. I have Gary Martin. Just again, this is I think a philosophical thing that we run into every year with these discussions of what he did from going from a good runner, a good cross country runner, and obviously a very good miler. You could say kind of a similar thing with like Lucas Bonds, good on the track, and kind of really converted that to the grass this year, but he went to like just a completely different level from just like, hey, this guy probably could be an All-American at some point in his career. I think we would have agreed with that. I don't think we ever really thought this was someone who could be scaring the top 10 at the national meet, that could be an ACC cross country champion. Like this, that just didn't seem realistic at any point in his career. And for him to break out the way that he did, now he's coming from a higher like floor than a lot of these other guys on this list, and I think that's maybe the reason why you don't pick him. But the heights that he reached, I think, are just higher than anybody we really could have imagined. The person I think that you picked, I think you have a very compelling argument for as well.
I hate when you vote on this award.
We always disagree on this.
I hate this. So Ben makes an argument, and it's not a bad argument. It's a good argument. Ben's argument is, hey, the good from good to great, or I think more specifically from great to elite,
yes,
is so hard, even if on paper it quantitatively isn't the same number of spots as someone going from just okay to great or just okay to good. That small jump to an entirely new tier of fitness is just as hard as anything else.
Yeah.
And while I don't necessarily disagree, I still struggle to then say, like, I still just struggle to look at this and be like, okay, there are guys on this list who were not far behind Martin whatsoever. You know, you look at Langone or Zagarsky or Cootie, right? Other guys like this, and yet their leaps were just as big just to get to that same spot. And so for that reason, I didn't take Martin. And don't get me wrong. I like him. I think he's great, but I didn't take him.
So, and I hear you. I think that if you just look at the national meet, and that's how you kind of are picking, and you're saying, oh, okay, all right, behind him you have Cootie, you have Legone, and Zagarsky right behind Martin. I think if that's like what you're weighting the most, you probably should weight it a lot, but maybe not as much as what I'm doing. Then yeah, I think it's a pretty obviously like you would pick one of those guys because they finished very close and they're coming from a much lower place in previous years than Martin. But I think just you look at the entirety of the year and specifically that ACC title, and I think that's what showed me like this 13th place finish wasn't like that surprising for Gary Martin. Whereas like a lot of these other performances from these other guys like Langone, Cootie, Zagarsky, good performances throughout the year, and especially Cootie with his Southeast regional performance. But these seem like kind of outlier performances at nationals in a way that Martin, this just seemed a lot more real and consistent and sustainable.
I won't doubt you there. I do think of that group, Martin was the better runner. He was undeniably the better runner. And I also agree. I love that you're saying, hey, look at the entirety of their season, not just national meet. 100% agree. The catch is that like Langone and Zagarsky were pretty good in the regular season. It's not like they were like, struggling at the tail end of these top 30s of Nuttycombe or pre-nationals. They were solidly in these fields. And so while I do agree that Martin was holistically the better overall runner, I also think those guys, while certainly not as good, weren't dramatically far behind. And for that reason, I'll just keep it like this. I voted for one of those three guys other than Martin. That would be between Langone, Zagarsky, and Cootie. I voted for one of those three.
I also think, and we haven't mentioned his name, I think Aiden Smith has a pretty good shout for this as well. And he was someone I was seriously considering. 29th at nationals, put together a very good performance at Big Tens, was just very strong at the end of the year. And I think out of like this, like all these guys that we've talked about had the lowest expectations for him coming into this season. And for him to still be a top 30 name, I think is, or top 30 at nationals, I think puts him in that same kind of tier for me for most improved.
I would not argue at all for anyone who wanted to put Smith as their winner. So I'm actually like looking up a quick stat. I just wanted to see something. Oh, here we go. So his 5K PR from high school, I'm looking around here. I don't see anything specific to high school, but on TFRS, his 5K PR is 15:12, which is hilarious.
You're telling me I could have finished as a top 30 All-American if I just kept plugging away at it?
You too, Ben, could have been an All-American in the distance that is what? How many? Like 6 times more than your ideal distance? I guess
Yes.
maybe it depends on if you say the 800 is, but yeah, tough look for you there. Sorry about that, but yeah, I thought this was one of the better, like, most improved fields though that we've had in a
Yes.
while. Like the fact that Lucas Bonds is a predominant miler who had fallen out of the conversation, and he just kind of wasn't really nationally relevant. Over the last year, has had a great revival. He's been awesome. Sprott has elevated his game. Sands became one of the most crucial middle lineup scorers in the
Hmm.
nation, period. And Abraham Shalingam was really, really good. He was competitive with the Oklahoma State guys multiple times. Oh, just a great deal all around.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think we've covered this one. Let's go on to the women's side. Most improved award for the women. We have Allie Weimer of Minnesota. Beak is it Bike or Beak?
Bieke? I don't know.
Bieke Schipperin
Bieke?
of
Yeah.
Florida State. This is always where it's like, oh man, our lack of pronunciation of these names really comes through when we're having to list out these groups of nominees. Aaron Vringer of Utah, Chloe Thomas of UConn, Hannah Gapes, NC State, Sadie Sigstead of Villanova, Florence Caron of Penn State, Anika Thompson, Oregon, and Sarah Tate, West Virginia. Again, I have someone that I have written down, but I this is another one where I feel like I could go back and forth a little bit here.
Yeah, I don't like this one for you. For me, I like my pick, obviously. But it's a very similar, like, already good but elevated to the great status.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think this actually, the picks that we had for this award were pretty diverse enough for
Hmm.
us to say who we picked. So go ahead. Who did you pick?
Right now, I have Chloe Thomas, and again, just kind of like the Gary Martin one. Not after we record this, I might change, depending on some of your thoughts. But again, I just thought she was from a storyline perspective, she was one of the most compelling runners of the year. Just
Yep.
the leap that she made, where she was just at the front of every race, and ultimately wrapped it up with what was it? She finished ninth
Right.
at
Yeah.
nationals, and I mean was right there for really
Mhm.
like a top five finish. Honestly, wasn't really that far out of the picture. Was seventh going into the last kilometer. Just was fantastic and was a better low stick in a year where I mean it was super competitive up front, right? I mean there was a lot of it was a very front loaded. I feel like national field, and she showed that she completely belonged. Now she was already very good, so it's hard to say like all right she made the biggest jump of anyone. It again comes down to she made the most significant jump from great to elite, but I could hear a lot of arguments for a lot of these other nominees.
I was down between Allie Weimer of Minnesota and Hannah Gapes of NC State. The reason why I didn't choose Gapes is because she was already found, like, success at last year. Let me take a look here. She ran 4:16 in the 1500. She was 15:58 in the 5K. She was 73rd at the national meet last year. She was 51st at Nutty Comb. So it's not like she was completely, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's not like she was completely a non-factor, right? She was certainly
Yeah.
already had some great value, showed promise. Like, you could see an avenue where she was going to be really good. For Weimer, there really wasn't a whole lot there that said that she was going to have the season that she was as consistently as she was. I mean, you look at what she did last year. I mean, she was 32nd at the Big Ten Championship, 69th at a very not good pre-nationals field. She was 30th at the Midwest region, didn't even qualify for nationals. She was 42nd at the GRIAC invite. And you can't kind of look at what she did on the track, 16:35K and 34:32 10K. And all of a sudden now she's one of the most consistent, reliable low sticks in the country, placing 48th at the national meet, which was probably her worst race of the season. So as I kind of unfold all of this, I go, this jump was completely unprecedented. She was so much better in every facet, in every race. And I just struggle to see, like, how we say, like, someone was more improved than her.
Yeah. I definitely hear the argument. Honestly, the Gapes one I find a little bit more compelling.
Hmm.
Again, just for from my perspective of hey, like I agree. I think that Weimer made the biggest jump of anyone. Using my more like I lean towards more like the true low sticks for this category. I think Weimer maybe misses out a little bit, but I think Gapes might because she just seemed to get better throughout the season too, and obviously finished just as high up as Chloe Thomas did, finishing 8th at the national meet. I think I might be leaning more towards Gabe's, although the point that you said, this felt like this could be coming. Obviously, very talented runner that we could see like the trajectory here going from that like freshman to sophomore year as well. That there's kind of like I feel like when in the NBA voting, right? A lot of people won't vote for second year players in most
Yeah.
improved because it's just hey, you expect to take a big jump after your rookie season. Kind of you could use that same kind of argument with Gapes, but I think I might actually lean more towards Gapes than Thomas after talking through all this.
It's very Bill Simmons of you to be like, "Hey, just because they went from freshman to sophomore season, that does what do you mean? What do you mean? We shouldn't be voting for these guys." I listen to way too much Bill Simmons. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think to say that, like, yes, we could see Gabe's making a rise. I still don't think we could have seen her being 8th at the
No,
national meet. Like
I
that's
agree.
like, and that I agree is like, whoa, like of all the names at the start of the season, like if I gave you like the entire NCAA field, everyone in there, and just said, rank them by the likelihood of who will be in the top 10. Um, yeah, I think that would be it would be a very, very big gap for until Gabe's name shows up.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately why I think I might change my vote to her because yeah, I think that it is it's my favorite kind of leap from like a good runner to like top 10 in the country, and that's clearly what she did. All right, let's go on to the best performance award on the men's side. The nominees we have are Parker Wolf wins Nuttycombe Invite in then course record time. Gary Martin defeats Parker Wolf and Ethan Strand en route to ACC title. Haptim Samuel wins pre-nationals over Graham Blanks. Brian Massow wins Big 12 title over Solomon Kipchoge and Casey Klinger. Patrick Kipperop wins SEC cross country championships in 21:57 for the 8K. Graham Blanks wins NCAA title with big move over final kilometer. And Haptim Samuel places second at the NCAA cross country championships with one spike. I'm going to be honest, this year felt a little light on the elite performances. We've certainly had, I think, better cast of nominees. I didn't feel like any of these were super compelling, and I kind of defaulted to who won the biggest race, and I don't love that.
So here's the catch for everyone who's maybe like a bit unaware of how we do this. When I say best performance, you are allowed to vote for the performance that you believe is the most impressive, the
Yeah.
most impactful, the most entertaining, or the most surprising, right?
Mhm.
There's 4 different ways that you can really look at this reward.
Yeah.
And I did that because if we didn't do that category, then it'd just be like, well, who won the national title?
Right.
Okay, cool. Typically, though, even though we have that flexible criteria, I have always leaned in your kind of direction of like, well, who won the national title? It's the best race. I deviated from that this year, and I think you saw.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know what? Let me double check just to make sure. Yeah, it's diverse enough of an entry pool. I said Gary Martin winning the ACC title. I think it was the most surprising. I think it was the most impactful in terms of
Yeah.
establishing what he could be. It was interesting. It was impressive. It was exciting. Like he took down Strand and Wolf, even if Wolf wasn't at 100%. Um, there's just so many things that check the box where I go, yes, was it the best win of the season? Maybe not. Was it even the top 2 wins of the season? Maybe not. But I think what he did in terms of establishing himself as an like elite cross country runner, taking down those names, the surprise factor, the stage that it was on, I chose Gary Martin.
Yeah, and another good way of framing this is, hey, what races are you going to remember from this year, right?
Mm,
Like, and ranking it based off of that. And Gary Martin's ACC performance is certainly one that I'm going to remember. Obviously,
yep.
I held a lot of weight in my discussion of Gary Martin winning Most Improved, right? I mentioned that several times because that was just such a big surprise and really kind of like cemented him as one of the top guys in the NCAA now. So I hear that argument. I think the other one that was compelling to me, because again, something that I'm going to remember, is Heptum Samuel finishing second with one spike, like with blood on that one spike. I think you're just going to remember that, and we're always going to have that what if of like, does he win if he has two spikes, gets through the race a little bit cleaner? And I think that's always going to be something that we are going to question. Yeah, I'm still not loving either of those in terms of someone repeating a national title in convincing fashion against, I think, one of the best fields that we've seen. I mean, taking down the 10K, the reigning 10K track champion, someone who beat him at pre nationals. I think that ultimately just was seismic enough that I'm going to remember this a little bit more.
Fair enough. I'm not saying that's wrong. In fact, I was really close to doing the same thing as you, but I did not. I think that's all we got on
Yeah.
that. But let's move to the women's side. The nominees were Sadie Sixstead earns surprise win at the Nuttycombe Invite. Pamela Koski secures win over Hilda Alamamwe at pre-nationals. Chloe Thomas wins the Big East XC Championships. Kimberly May wins the Princeton Fall Classic. Doris Limagall secures the win at the SEC XC Championships over an elite field. And then Doris Limagall runs away from Koski and Alamamwe to win NCAA gold. This is pretty straightforward.
I
Doris
think
Limagall
there
was
was yeah, so I think that obviously the straightforward one is Doris Lemongol runs away from Kazgai and Alamamwe to win NCAA gold. And that's the one I voted on. I think you could make an argument for the Pamela Kazgai win at pre nationals. I think that was just an entertaining race and one that really cemented Kazgai as, hey, she's going to be a factor we thought she would be, but she's going to be one of the two women that will likely win the NCAA title. But I think again that finishes second clearly to the Doris Lemon goal NCAA title.
I would have actually chosen Sadie Sixstead winning
Oh,
Nuttycombe.
interesting.
I thought from an entertainment, from a surprise,
Yeah,
from like
that's fair.
what we thought this could mean for Villanova. Now, granted, it turned out Nicole Van Ness would actually end up being the more important runner in the grand scheme of things this season. And Villanova, unfortunately, did not beat the national meet. But I did think Sixstead. I mean, I was like, yeah, like could she be a top 10 runner in that field on a good day? Sure, yeah. Like we knew she was good and she was consistent and she was reliable and she did better in aggressive races and longer distances. But if I would have told you, like, hey, she's going to win Nuttycombe, like, I don't think anyone
Yeah.
would have been like, hey, are you sure about that? Like, I don't know what the odds we would have put on that, but I don't think they would have been very favorable. So,
No, 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 and that's a fair point in terms of the surprise factor. I think Sigstead, uh, out of all of these, was the most surprising, right? I don't
yeah.
think anybody would have expected to have seen that coming into that race. So, yeah, not a whole lot to go into. I think in the rest
Yep.
of these nominees. So we can move on to best cross country coach award on the men's side. Of the nominees are Ed Eyestone of BYU, Jeremy Sudbury, Iowa State, Sean Smith, CBU. Brian Bell of Syracuse, John Hayes, Wake Forest, Chris Bucknam, Arkansas, Mick Byrne, Wisconsin, Chris Miltenberg of North Carolina, and Mike Smith of Northern Arizona. I think there's a pretty clear winner in my mind, and that is Ed Eyestone. But who in your mind is number two?
I did not think that this was a clear winner.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Okay.
I thought, did I choose Eyestone? Yes, I did. But I really thought about Sean Smith of California
That's who I
Baptist.
was gonna say.
I
Yep.
really thought about that hard. Like I sat there and I think I stared at that for like 5 minutes and I just like moved on trying to vote around it. I was really close to being Sean Smith. This is a guy who entered a California Baptist program that lost numerous high impact veteran names from a really top ranked, highly ranked team. He had a kind of a new personnel, some new, some returning, and they were not expected to be good at all. Like
Yep.
at all. They also lost their coach from last year. He steps in, and all of a sudden they're 13th at the national meet. And that wasn't a fluke. They were consistently great throughout the
Yep.
entirety of the season. In terms of making the most of having the least, Sean Smith is arguably the best. And if someone voted for him, I would not argue that at all.
Yeah. I agree. I think he was someone that is probably going to be maybe off people's radars just because California Baptist wasn't like a top 5 program. But the fact that they were top 15 and, like you said, consistently a top 15 program throughout the year was one of the more stunning developments throughout the year. I think what Sean Smith was able to do is one of the best coaching jobs that we've seen over the last couple of years, especially if you're not thinking of, hey, a team that gets onto the podium. The other names that I thought stood out to me were John Hayes.
Yep.
I think again we expected this team to progress, but they actually took that step, and it was a little rocky at times, and they still did
Is
it
that a pun?
a little bit. Um, and so I think that's impressive. Jeremy Sudbury and Chris Bucknam again had talent, had some newcomers that they integrated fairly well on their way to podium finishes. I think that was impressive to see. Rest of this group, I didn't have too many other thoughts on.
I actually think if there was a third place of
I
this,
know where you're going.
why? Who?
Are you saying Mick Byrne?
No.
No.
I'm going Chris Miltenberg.
Oh, okay.
This team was like really in a pickle.
Yeah.
If we had gone into this season and be like, hey, Max Murphy, not going to be a scorer,
Right.
you would have been like, well, wait, this team's like going to be at the, just outside the top 15, right? Like, I mean, you kind of like try to do the math. You're like, well, who's going to step up? And he wasn't a scorer.
Mhm.
Instead, Colton Sands just takes this massive leap. Strand becomes even more elite than he already was. And despite Will Coogan and Patrick Anderson sustaining really bad injuries a year and a half ago, a little over that, in a severe car accident, those guys actually came through in a big way, especially Coogan. Coogan began
Yep.
to really pick up some momentum in terms of like trying to salvage this season. I was extremely impressed. I thought UNC getting 6 was a big deal. I would not have at all picked them to get 6 again if you had told me that Murphy wasn't going to be a scorer. I mean, it was just really impressive.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking, hey, it's more like Sands just improvement that caused that. But
Sure.
your points of, hey, like Strand took a step forward, and then Coogan showed up when they really needed him the most. I think those are all feathers in Chris Miltenberg's cap. So I don't disagree with any of that. Let's move on to the women's side. Best cross country coach award. The nominees, we had Shalane Flanagan of Oregon, Diljit Taylor, BYU, Sean Cleary of West Virginia, Mike Smith, Northern Arizona, Ray Tracy of Providence, Lori Hennis of NC State, Darren Gosson, New Mexico, John Gondek of Penn State, and Sarah Hopkins, Minnesota. To me, this was a 2-horse race. I don't know if you felt similarly.
I did. I
Okay.
felt similarly. I was thinking of picking your nominee. I did not. Instead, I went with the other nominee. And just in terms of like breaking down who some of our top contenders for this one were,
Sure.
I think just kind of going off the list that we have, I think you could say that Diljit Taylor of BYU, Sean Cleary of West Virginia. What were your thoughts on Ray Tracy? Would you have put him in there?
Um, I think he was like third in my mind.
Right.
I think a step below, but I think kind of in a tier of his own in my mind, because I think what he was able to do. I was pretty high on Providence, so it didn't come as quite as a surprise to me where they ended up finishing in third place. But you have to give them a ton of credit for just integrating all that talent and getting Alex Millard ready to go in her first NCAA championship.
What's the top tier of what's the first tier of this award? Who's in that?
I think it's Taylor and Cleary.
Okay.
I think that's, and then it's
And
Tracy.
I will just leave it to the readers. That's who the vote ultimately comes down to.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say who I picked. You will not say who you picked.
Yeah.
But it is
You have a compelling case for both, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Taylor, they win the NCAA title. Was thought as probably the top, like second contender for this for the national championship coming into the season, and despite losing one of their best runners, ends up winning the NCAA championships. West Virginia, on the other hand, just comes from absolutely nowhere, and finishes second there. So it's, I mean, I don't think you can go wrong with either of these choices.
No, no, and the funny part about this is that, like, they each have arguments that counter each other, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, it's like, well, BYU didn't have Jenna Hutchins. It's like, okay, but West Virginia had what? They have Tekla Lacrali,
Yeah, they
right?
got nothing out of
Yeah,
her really.
they
Yeah.
really didn't get anything out of her, and they were relying on 3 women, and it's like, well, okay, well, BYU has more depth. Shouldn't you reward the team for more depth? Because that's called
Yeah.
development. It's like, well, yeah, sure, but, like, how about Sarah Tate getting 34th, and this team, despite having 0 depth after their top 5, no margin for error, still makes it onto the podium? Like, trying to play that kind of delicate of a dance, which two do you like more? And it's a really, really tough, like, balance to play there. So I'm with you. I thought this was kind of almost a toss up between those two teams. In terms of, like, what was the sneaky one that you maybe thought was, like, underappreciated, or maybe someone who's like, hey, I want to highlight that team?
Yeah, for me it was Lori Hennis. I thought
Hmm.
she just kind of saved the season, to be honest. I thought it was really going off the rails. And my whole thing was, hey, this year doesn't matter that much for NC State. It's about developing the talent and putting knowing who you have for your next national championship team. And I think she did that. They finished the season strong. You know that you have a couple pieces here that, hey, you have the foundation. You just need to supplement and get into that transfer portal. Get the next Amaris Tanisma in the program. You get someone like that to just fill out that 4 or 5 spot. And all of a sudden, this is a team that's challenging for yet another national title. So I think it might not seem like it compared to the NC State standard of years past, but I thought this was one of the more successful NC State seasons that we've had over the last 5 years.
I would have said John Gondak. And by the way, I agree with everything you just said about NC State and Lori Hennis. I think some people will be like, what do you mean? They weren't nearly as good as last year. It's like, no, no, no. They salvaged a fantastic
Yeah.
season, a fantastic end to the season, I
Mhm.
should say. John Gondak of Penn State, partially because he made me look really good with that early
Yeah.
preseason prediction. But also, like, this team wasn't that different from last year. And last year's team was like, what, last or second to last at the national meet? And now they're 15th at the national meet. And maybe they weren't quite that good throughout the season, but they were mostly that good throughout the
Yeah.
season. And you kind of look at the lineup structure and you're like, okay, it's Florence Caron, maybe Haley Kitching, kind of bridging that. And then there's kind of just some okay, good women.
Yeah.
It's not like it was like a lineup that really, like, wowed you. And yet it was so clear that they were, like, leaps and bounds better than they were last year. And trying to do that with just the same personnel, I think, is very hard.
They were competent, which I think comes down to coaching. Like a
Yeah.
lot, like when you don't have that kind of top end talent and you just put together lineups that are consistent and competent, I think that reflects extremely well on coaching and preparation, because those are the things that you can control, or you can't control necessarily the talent that you have in any given season. And like you said, I think Gondak got the most out of what the hand he was dealt this year. So I completely agree with that. Let's move on to most valuable runner on the men's side. Nominees, we have Graham Blanks, Harvard, Heptim Samuel of New Mexico, Casey Klinger, BYU, Parker Wolf of North Carolina, Liam Murphy of Villanova, and Brian Massow of Oklahoma State. I think coming into the national meet, you had a compelling argument for several of these. After the national meet, I think it's pretty clear that this is Graham Blanks' award.
It's Graham Blanks' award. If there was a runner up, it'd be Hatem Samuel. Who was your third?
Um, hmm. I'm going between two different individuals. Who do you think I have?
I think you have Casey Klinger and Brian Massow.
Yeah, yeah. I think Klinger I mean, they won the national championship, and he gave them that like potency up front that we maybe feared they wouldn't have. Now, Masao was better, I think, throughout the entire year. I don't think I'm not saying that Klinger was necessarily the better runner at any point of the year than Masao, but I think in terms of his value for his team, I think Klinger was more of an X factor for them than Masao was for Oklahoma State.
Well, the nice thing about the criteria that we have for this award is that voters can choose to vote for the best distance runner or the most valuable distance runner, which
Yeah.
are not necessarily the
No.
same thing. And so for that reason, I would have taken Brian Massell as my third pick. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of a chalk board.
Yeah.
If you followed the season, you kind of know why. That's all I have. We can kind of move on.
Most valuable runner on the women's side, we have Doris Lemon-Gull of Alabama, Kaylee McCabe, West Virginia, Amy Bunnage, Stanford, Pamela Kosgei of New Mexico. Again,
I'm also just going to throw this out there. I'm going to add Hilda Olmamwe in there. I don't know why she
Yes.
was not already in there, but she should have been in there. So yeah.
Yeah. Hilda Olmamwe of Florida as well. Again, we've talked about Lemon-Gull's performances. She was clearly the best in the country. I think you could maybe make an argument if you're saying, hey, from a value standpoint, you could maybe make an argument for McCabe because she was just so important to this team finishing second. We talked about how little margin for error they had. She came through in the clutch race after race. And I think that, I mean, she clearly wasn't one of the top 3 runners in the country, but in terms of her value to her team, she very well might have been.
I have no notes. It's Doris Lemon-Gull. It's a pretty obvious pick. And after that, it would have been Pamela Kosgei. And after that, I'd still maybe that's where you get a little tricky with McCabe
Right.
and Olmamwe.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
probably would have still taken Olmamwe, who's just, I thought, flat out better, beat McCabe, I think, 2 times this season. So
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, though, it's a fairly straightforward award, and I don't think anyone's gonna come at us with pitchforks. So
Yep. Yeah. I agree. All right. So I think that wraps it up. Those are all our awards. Like I said, if you want to see who actually won these awards, make sure you check out thestridreport.com and check out that article we will have write-ups on each of the nominees, as well as our vote totals and who ultimately took home the award. It is always very funny to see Garrett get overruled on some of these and his reactions, and I can tell you that is almost certainly going to happen at least a couple of these awards. So just stay tuned for that.
yeah, what I hate is that like you guys have like studied and learned not just the sport, but like my preferences for how to build content, and now you've used it against me, and I don't like this at all. Like I think you're making great arguments. I just disagree. So yeah, I was pretty frustrated with you on a couple of these, and I think I'm going to be pretty frustrated with a handful of writers on this. So so that's all I got. Make sure to go check out us and follow, rate, and review Apple, Spotify. Go subscribe on YouTube. You can do that. Again, be sure to send us a mailbag question if you have them. We'll do one probably in the upcoming weeks or so. Maybe not immediately next week, but Ben, we got Boston U season opener next week. We're going to have people on site there. We're going to have a videographer, photographer as well. We're going to have some transfer news. Actually, by the time you're listening to this, one article should already be out. And a whole lot more. Into track rankings also coming later this month. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Wasn't even thinking about that. But the sport truly never sleeps, especially
stops.
with the transfers. Like the dog days of December are no longer dog days. There's still going to be news, plenty to talk about. So yeah, looking forward to all that. But until next time, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.